1995, July 7th. Time 7:15 p.m. Place Deen Dayal Upadhyay Hospital, New Delhi. The most crowded area in this hospital is its casualty. In one corner of the corridor lies a stretcher carrying a dead body. It is of a man who died just a few minutes before. The body remains unattended. He was brought to the hospital from Delhi's Tihar jail, soon to be checked and declared dead, and the jail doctor who had brought him to the hospital was gone by now. Nobody around, not even the attendants, bothered to pay the minimum respect one could do to a dead body by covering the face with a sheet of cloth. The cause for death in this case, as declared by the doctors, was asphyxia or the inability to breathe. Breathlessness was caused by the clotted blood he had vomited in his last moments. The man who was lying there, in a totally unattended state, was none other than the man who was once considered as a business baron, popularly known as the Biscuit King. A man who the media and the business world celebrated as a millionaire and business tycoon, Rajan Pillai. Though he was a multimillionaire, what was denied to Rajan Pillai in his last moments was the bare minimum consideration that even the most ordinary person on the streets deserves during his last moments. Born in Vendor Junction, Kollam, into a cashew trading family, Rajan Pillai joined his father's business early on and went on to build a business empire by building top-selling brands in biscuits and chips. His fall from grace was quite sudden. He travelled the streets of London City in a Bentley car, lived in a palatial home adorned with expensive paintings in Singapore, and had access to every luxury possible and friends at high places. Rajan Pillai never compromised on a high lifestyle. And yet, he was all alone and suffered unimaginable pain as he breathed his last. After his death, the Legislative Assembly of Kerala convened a special session and condoned the death of a son of the soil. Even after more than 2 decades, the mystery and intrigue surrounding Rajan Pillai's last moments in life still remain unsolved. This is the unusual story of a man who, with sheer hard work and acumen, built a large business empire and went on to own a majority stake in the Britannia food industries. This is the story of his untimely death. It is indeed a strange story. This story begins in a small town in Kerala, India. An intersection in this small town of Kollam district is known as Vendor Junction. The place got its name from a stamp paper vendor, Krishna Pillai, in the 1920s. Well built, with a thick moustache and with a unique physique, he began dealing with the real estates stuck in litigation, making a commission.
പിന്നീട് കൊല്ലത്തും പരിസരത്തുമൊക്കെ ഡിസ്പ്യൂട്ടുകളിൽ കടന്നിരുന്ന സ്ഥലങ്ങളുടെ വിൽപ്പനയിലൂടെ ആ വിൽപ്പന വിലയുടെ ഒരു നിശ്ചിത ശതമാനം കമ്മീഷനും സ്വന്തമാക്കിയിരുന്ന വെണ്ടർ കൃഷ്ണപിള്ള.
He soon identified brighter prospects in cashew nut processing and trade.
ബിസിനസ്സിലേക്ക് കടക്കുന്നു.
The world hasn't yet discovered cashew trading opportunities. Cashew nuts were one of the many gifts the Portuguese presented to the local rulers, from whom the former got the permission to build a fort in Kannur in Kerala in 1505. Kaju is the term used by the Portuguese to refer to cashew, and hence cashew must have been derived from kaju. Locals call the fruit parangimanga and nut parangiyandi. It was in the 16th century that the local people realized the possibility of cashew plantations in the laterite-rich soil of Kollam district in Kerala. In due course, they experimented with various methods of processing cashew nuts. Very soon, a company called Piers Leslie began to process it commercially. By 1920, trading and soon small-scale processing of cashew nuts began. Though the Britishers had started factories, It was a local Malayali, TV Swaminathan, who started trading cashew nuts from Kollam.
കൊല്ലത്ത് അണ്ടിക്കച്ചവടം നടത്തിയിരുന്ന വെണ്ടർ കൃഷ്ണപിള്ള. ഈ വെണ്ടർ കൃഷ്ണപിള്ള
By the 1940s, vendor Krishna Pilla also entered the trade. Vendor Krishna Pilla's son Kunju Krishna Pilla and niece Janardhanan Pilla were of the same age. As Kerala of that time practiced the matrilineal system, vendor Krishna Pilla bestowed the same amount of love and affection on both the children. By the time the kids were aged 10 years, vendor Krishna Pilla was blessed with a baby girl. It brought a lot of joy to the household. However, Janardhanan Pilla never even in his dreams thought that a few years down the line he would be marrying the same little girl. By the time Janardhan Pilla reached 14 years of age, he was tasked by his uncle with the running of his cashew nuts processing factory. By this time, vendor had set up cashew processing factories in 4 places. Janardhan Pilla had to visit one factory every day and tally the income and expense statement. After school, by evening, Janardhanan would visit the cashew factory when usually only the watchman and accountant would be left in the office at that time. He has to ensure that all the entries and books are proper. Next day morning, he has to report to his uncle and only then can he attend the daily classes. This responsibility and training he received at such a young age of 14 years helped later in making him the #1 cashew exporter in India. After completing graduation in philosophy, Janardhanan Pilla returned to native place Kollam only to be told by his uncle to take charge of the company full-time. Janardhanan was rewarded very well for these responsibilities. Following his uncle's instruction, Janardhanan Pilla handholds and trains the third son of vendor Krishna Pilla, K. Ravindranath Nair, who subsequently becomes a successful cashew trader. His keen interest in arts and production of Malayalam films like Achani led to the President of India honouring him with a national award. He is known in Kerala as Achani Ravi. One day, Janardhanan Pilla returns from work to hear the surprising announcement from his uncle. It was the proposed wedding of Janardhanan Pilla, that too with his first cousin Rajamani, the little girl he had once held in his lap. He obliges and agrees to the marriage considering his respect for the uncle. 1947 December 21st, they are blessed with a baby boy, the birth of Rajan Pillai. By 1953, vendor Krishna Pilla gave one of his factories to his daughter Rajamani and Janardhan Pilla. He also gives a princely sum of rupees 50,000 towards operational expenses of the factory. Janardhanan Pilla invests this money in setting up his own cashew trading business. His start was not without mistakes, but he learns quickly and systematically corrects each misstep and makes significant advances in business. He started several new companies. In the 60s, he was the first to start cashew wholesale and retail marketing. He set sail to African nations like Tanzania and Kenya in search of large quantities of cashew, where he signs exclusive deals to secure assured supply for the future. This helps him produce cashew profitably and process them at his factories in Kollam. It is to be noted that Africa those days was infamous for contagious diseases which made such visits extremely dangerous. But that was not a deterrent to the global explorer Janardhanan Pilla. These deals in fact helped him gain huge profits in the coming days. Meanwhile, Rajan Pillai has grown up and joined mechanical engineering at TKM Engineering College, Kollam. Soon after completion in 1968, he joined his father's business. Janardhanan Pillai asks his son Rajan Pillai to join his business trips to England, America and Europe. The objective was to set up a wholesale business. They would visit several shops and ask shop owners if they have cashew nuts for sale. Many of them wouldn't even have heard about cashew nuts, in which case They are given free samples of the finest quality cashew nuts, which prompts the majority of these shop owners to give bulk orders to the father and son team. By the early 80s, Janardhan Pillai, or KGP, as he was famously known, became India's #1 cashew trader. An ambitious Janardhan Pillai decided to invest in Brazil and Mozambique. However, the Prime Minister of India, Indira Gandhi, requested him not to pursue these ventures, citing certain business dynamics. Janardhan Pillai also applies unique accounting practices to further the profit margins of his business.
പണം വാരുന്നു.
In 1982, a huge setback hit Janardhan Pillai's business. That year, he had received a major order for cashews from Russia. Those days, Russia was India's favorite trade partner. Russia used to procure large quantities of commodities like processed cashew from India, only to be sold at a good margin to America. As India was the primary processor of cashew, American firms had no other option but to buy Indian consignments of cashew at any rate. All Russia had to do was to load cashew onto the ships and transport to America. In the process, Russia benefited hugely from this arrangement. Soon, Russia gives a bulk order for 24,000 tons of processed cashew to Janardhan Pillai. This encourages him to procure large quantities of raw cashew nuts from Africa. He sources 22,000 tons from Tanzania and begins processing of the same. Encouraged by the then Chief Minister of Kerala, K. Karunakaran, Central Minister C.M. Stephen and Prime Minister Indira Gandhi, he goes on to procure as much cashew nuts from the domestic market as possible. Having procured and processed sufficient quantities, the cashew nuts were packed and labeled ready to be exported. Around this time, the trade pact between Russia and India was called off. India had been importing fertilizers from Russian factories. However, as a result of FCI restructuring in 1978, Indian fertilizer companies began to increase their production output, prompting the government to slow down imports from Russia in order to help Indian companies. This annoys Russia, following up with a decision to stop importing cashew nuts from India in retaliation. Despite a written agreement, Russia unilaterally decides to dishonor the deal. With this, the large quantities of processed and packed cashew nuts weighing 25,000 tons that Janardhan Pillai had organized had no takers. The news of Russia's withdrawal spreads among trade circles, resulting in the market value of cashew nut declining. Till then, what was $3.6 for a pound became half of it. The major shock for Janardhan Pillai was the sudden disappearance of political leaders and ministers who had earlier encouraged him to take the risk and meet the demand from Russia. The loss to cashew traders in India amounted to rupees 40 crores, out of which rupees 12 crores was accounted for by Janardhan Pillai. Imagine the current value of this money. He found it difficult to repay the loan amount and interest to Indian Overseas Bank and Indian Bank, rupees 3 crores and rupees 2.5 crores respectively. Worse was the situation when the banks refused to grant any further loans to his business. Janardhan Pillai was under severe mental stress and even suffered a heart attack. According to Rajmohan Pillai, the younger son of Janardhan Pillai, they had to work really hard for another 27 years to completely recover from this major setback. Pillai was not alone in this crisis. There were 52 other cashew exporters who were affected. Many of them had since left the cashew processing industry altogether. Only a few, along with Janardhan Pillai, could emerge from this crisis situation.
നഷ്ടത്തെ അതിജീവിക്കാൻ സാധിച്ചിട്ടില്ല എന്നാണ് രാജ്മോഹൻ പിള്ള പറയുന്നത്.
1973, Rajan Pillai lands in Singapore. His father, Janardhan Pillai, during his heydays, had started several businesses in India for Rajan Pillai. Janardhan Pillai and Sons, or Janso, had by then ventured into shipping, meat export, joint venture with Tata to invest in Taj Hotel as a part of business diversification. However, none of these met the profit expectations. Rajan Pillai decided to exit all loss-making businesses and move his base to Singapore in the year 1973. He established his first business at Jurong Industrial Estate. It was a food processing and packing venture. Rajan Pillai's venture, 20th Century Foods, introduced a new brand called Ole, which immediately established itself in Singapore and neighboring countries. Rajan Pillai did not take much time to establish himself as an important businessman in Singapore. Known for his flamboyant style, in no time he established a strong network of friends in the business circle of Singapore. Rajan Pillai had a unique capability to establish professional relationships in high society. Though Rajan Pillai had a family business legacy to fall upon, he established a new multi-million business empire spreading across 6 countries, which can be credited to the sheer hard work he had done in Singapore.
സിംഗപ്പൂർ എന്ന രാജ്യത്ത് അദ്ദേഹം നടത്തിയ കഠിന പ്രയത്നത്തിന്റെ പുറത്തു മാത്രമാണ്.
As 20th Century Foods and Ole established a strong presence in Singapore, came the entry of a potential competitor, Standard Brands. After 2 years of competition, in 1982, both companies agreed on a merger proposal. This was just the beginning of a series of alliances and partnerships Rajan Pillai was due to pursue in the days to come.
നിരവധി കൂട്ടുകെട്ടുകളിൽ ആദ്യത്തേത് മാത്രമായിരുന്നു. ഇവിടെ വെച്ചാണ്
Rajan Pillai meets Frederick Ross Johnson, who would soon become his mentor and business partner. But Pillai didn't know then that Frederick would become his nemesis in future. Frederick became the president of Standard Brand. Meanwhile, Nabisco, a US food major, decided to acquire Standard Foods and make Frederick the CEO of the new entity. As for Rajan Pillai, though this friendship opened up many new business opportunities, unfortunately, it ended up in turning a great friend into an enemy. And that person in Rajan Pillai's life was none other than Nusli Wadia, the owner of Bombay Dyeing and a real estate tycoon of Mumbai. Nusli Wadia was more than a business associate to Rajan Pillai. It was Nusli Wadia who convinced Rajan Pillai's parents and made possible Pillai's second marriage with Gopika. Rajan had fallen in love with her at the front office desk of the Taj Hotel. All these made the relationship between Rajan Pillai and Nusli Wadia stronger as it extended beyond business. This is the same Nusli Wadia that Rajan Pillai annoyed due to certain business deals he pursued. In 1981, in a casual conversation, Nusli Wadia mentioned to Rajan Pillai about the purchase of shares in Associate Biscuits. Very soon, he got to know that Rajan's friend, Frederick Johnson, had purchased 38% shares of Associate Biscuits for Nabisco. Rajan Pillai would lead operations of Britannia in India. At this point, it is important to consider the political legacy which Nusli Wadia comes with. He is the grandson of Muhammad Ali Jinnah and blessed with the knowledge of astute politic maneuvers coupled with a sharp business acumen. Nusli felt cheated by his once dear friend, and that was beyond pardonable for him. 1985 is the beginning of a series of events that would change the dynamics of business for all the players in this story. Rajan Pillai sold off 50% of his stake in the Singapore joint venture and became area president of Nabisco. Rajan Pillai invested in Britannia by purchasing 11% of its shares. In a year, Pillai is weighing the prospects of buying another 38% shares. The merged entity Nabisco Standard soon announced another merger with major tobacco player RJR Group to become RJR Nabisco. With this, the ownership of Britannia was also with RJR Nabisco. The year 1989 witnessed the entry of KKR in this scene, an investment bank with eyes firmly fixed on acquiring RJR Nabisco. With deft moves, KKR inches closer to its goal.
RJR Nabiscoയെ ഏറ്റെടുക്കാൻ വേണ്ടി KKR കരുക്കൾ
As Nabisco sensed imminent danger in the form of buyout of its shares by KKR, it offered $75 per share to its shareholders. KKR counter-offered $90. Johnson went a step further and offered $100 per share. Several twists and turns later, KKR put on the table $25 billion to take control of Nabisco. The desperate efforts by Nabisco owners to prevent an aggressive takeover by KKR had resulted in building a debt burden of $22.8 billion. The only option in front of the firm to reduce this burden was to sell off some of the subsidiaries it had across the world. Britannia was one of these entities, along with other Nabisco ventures based out of countries like Hong Kong, Singapore, and Malaysia. At this time, Rajan Pillai was the area president of Nabisco Africa, Asia Pacific, and the CEO of Nabisco Commodities. Pillai drafted a strategy with his mentor Johnson to release Associated Biscuits from the clutches of the new owners. They decided to take the help from Group Danone. With Johnson's strategic inputs and Danone's assistance, Rajan Pillai assumed control of 38% ownership of Britannia India. Apart from this, Rajan Pillai also took control of Nabisco's operations in Hong Kong and New Zealand. As the dust settled down, an international event shook up the fortunes of Rajan Pillai, the Gulf War of 1990 that resulted in a stock market crisis across the world. Rajan Pillai had to circumvent several hurdles to smoothen the finance inflows to fund his new projects. One of those ambitious projects was his plan to bring Coca-Cola back to India in a joint venture. Coke, without Pillai's help, however, rides the new opportunity presented by India's economic liberalization policy to enter India on its own. Rajan Pillai was about to feel the wrath of Nusli Wadia for all that went wrong between their once cordial relationship. Nusli Wadia was able to convince Danone that they had been taken for a ride by Pillai. Danone replaced Rajan Pillai with Nusli Wadia at the top of Britannia Industries in 1993. It followed Frederick Johnson switching sides and joining Nusli Wadia camp. This was followed by Frederick Johnson filing a criminal complaint in the Commercial Affairs Department of Singapore against Rajan Pillai. The accusation was that Rajan Pillai manipulated Britannia to buy his Singapore brand Olay from Nabisco for $7.24 million. The purchase decision was made by a board consisting of 11 members, of which Frederick Johnson was one. His accusation was that Rajan Pillai's decision to spend $7 million was without consent from the board. Rajan Pillai was now an accused in the eyes of the Singapore Commercial Affairs Department. Subsequently, 29 cases were filed against Rajan Pillai. Of these, 2 cases were stating that Rajan Pillai took a decision to spend money from a company to purchase its own shares. 22 cases were registered on the allegation that a certain nondescript cashew company cheated Frederick Johnson on financial deals. All these cases together summed up to $17 million of financial forgery as done by Rajan Pillai. Singapore was known for strict adherence to financial integrity and discipline, and it had a reputation of similar cases ending in conviction after several months of hearing. Rajan Pillai was awarded 14 years of imprisonment by the court. However, before the verdict was announced, Rajan Pillai flew from Singapore to India. It is said that Kalika Mohanachandran Nair, an IFS officer, helped his transit. Rajan Pillai was issued a new passport. However, the old passport was not cancelled, as only the new passport was confiscated by Singapore authorities at the beginning of the case, as Raj Mohan Pillai, brother of Rajan Pillai, remembers. Afraid that he won't get justice from the Singapore court, Rajan Pillai rescued himself. On April 10, 1995, he took a flight to India. Despite his transit to India, the Singapore government initiated proceedings against Rajan Pillai. Rajan Pillai applied for an anticipatory bail from the Mumbai High Court, which incidentally declined his request. On April 28, 1995, he was granted bail by Trivandrum Additional CJM CD Anil. However, the Kerala High Court considered a suo motu petition and cancelled the anticipatory bail order on June 26. The fact that the court considered a suo motu petition, even though the case had no major political or other implications at that time, was surprising according to Rajan Pillai's brother Rajmohan Pillai. He also suspects that it could have been orchestrated by Nusli Wadia and other people. Rajan Pillai, however, didn't surrender before the Kerala High Court. Instead, he travelled to New Delhi. His plan was to take tactical moves with the help of his Delhi contacts and even that of the godman Chandraswamy and his political circles. These efforts, however, didn't pay off. Meanwhile, several Indian newspapers also began to portray a villainous image of Rajan Pillai. On July 3, 1995, Rajan Pillai was arrested. In a hurried move, he was taken into custody by CBI from the luxury hotel Le Méridien in New Delhi and produced before the court the next day. Rajan Pillai's lawyers submitted a petition before the magistrate court, M.L. Mehta, seeking bail on consideration of his failing health condition. However, when the judge asked Pillai to share the names of prescribed medicines, he was unable to remember them. On July 4th, the court remanded and sent him to jail number 4 of the Tihar Jail, New Delhi. Despite being an established businessman with worldwide fame, he was not able to stop the arrest. Rajan Pillai and his lawyers couldn't prevent the remand despite his acute liver cirrhosis condition supported by medical certificates. Rajan Pillai was not taken to a hospital. At Tihar Jail, Rajan Pillai was not given the basic considerations that even the petty criminals receive. As a standard practice, new inmates at Tihar Jail undergo mulahiza, a report of the physical condition at the time of entry. Though he entered the jail on July 4th, with the court allocating him B-class ward, Rajan Pillai spent days waiting for mulahiza as it was indefinitely delayed. The judge who remanded Rajan Pillai had written a confidential letter to the resident medical officer instructing him to examine Rajan Pillai's medical condition and report back. A copy of the request letter from the lawyer indicating that his client is suffering from liver cirrhosis was also attached. The judge also instructed that the report should be given by 2 in the afternoon next day. 4 doctors were present on duty in the jail complex the day Rajan Pillai was imprisoned. On this day, by 7 in the evening, Rajan Pillai was examined by Dr. K. Venkatasubbayya and reported that Pillai is completely healthy. Pillai alerted the doctor that he vomited blood on 3rd June and requested that he be admitted immediately at the Escorts Hospital for emergency treatment. He informed the doctor that he has undergone a non-invasive surgery at the Escorts Hospital. But the doctor did not act on this information. On June 6th, he was produced before the court for hearing. However, the court informed June 11th as the next date for hearing. Pillai informed his lawyer that he may not survive till the next hearing considering his deteriorating health conditions. That night, he had to sleep on the cement floor of the cell. The hot summer of Delhi made the situation even more difficult for him. Rajan Pillai couldn't sleep that night. Cirrhosis by now was hitting him hard. Swelling started appearing in his legs. His fellow jailmate, George Kuti, recalls the suffering Rajan Pillai went through in the jail cell. The next day, that is on July 7th, Rajan Pillai was taken to the observation ward of jail number 4. Dr. Hera Lal examined him and mentioned in his report that the medical condition of Rajan Pillai was absolutely stable. The same evening, the lawyer of Rajan Pillai met him at jail to get his signatures on power of attorney. By this time, Rajan Pillai had a high temperature and was extremely weak. Pillai had to walk nearly 400 meters from the observation room to the administrative block where his lawyer was waiting, while outside the temperature was 41 degrees Celsius. The lawyer instantly realized the grave physical condition Rajan Pillai was in. Jail doctor Venkata Subbaiah examined Rajan Pillai at around 5:30, who was by then in an unconscious state. On seeing no response from Pillai, the doctor called for an ambulance which arrived by 5:50. Rajan Pillai's lawyer requested the jail superintendent that he be taken to a Scots hospital. The superintendent cites jail rules that inmates can be treated at government hospitals only. Rajan Pillai was thus taken to Deen Dayal Upadhyay Hospital. The ambulance took Rajan Pillai to the hospital. On the way itself, lying in a stretcher, foam and mucus started coming from his mouth along with drops of blood. By 6:20, the ambulance reached the hospital wing as the accompanying policemen brought Pillai inside for the checkup. The reference slip handed over by Dr. Venkata Subbaiah, who accompanied the ambulance, only mentioned Rajan Pillai's name, age as 47 years, male, fever and unconsciousness. On July 4th, Rajan Pillai had informed Dr. Venkata Subbaiah that he was a liver cirrhosis patient. By 7 in the evening, Pillai started bleeding from his nose and mouth as he gradually slipped into a respiratory arrest. Rajan Pillai died. The hospital doctor confirmed the death. Time of death, 7:15 p.m. The one who had lived a grand life and who was mindful enough to be compassionate to the needy, but he was not fortunate to get even a drop of water in his last moments. He was alone.
മരിക്കേണ്ടി വരുന്നത്.
The news of Rajan Pillai's untimely death in Delhi prompted the Legislative Assembly of Kerala to convene and condone the death of a business tycoon, a first in its history. Former Speaker of the House, Varkala Radhakrishnan, described the incident as judicial murder. Members cutting across political parties protested against the negligence on the part of the jail authorities and the government. S. Krishna Kumar was Member of Parliament from Kollam. Rajan Pillai firmly believed that the MP would come to his rescue, considering the close proximity the MP had with the family. But Rajan Pillai's wife, Neena Pillai, and close relatives alleged that the MP had not even attended their frantic phone calls for help. Neena Pillai settled the score by defeating S. Krishna Kumar in the general elections of 1996. Though she did not win the election, the votes she won were enough to stop the return journey of S. Krishna Kumar to the next parliament. It was Justice Leela Seth who was appointed by the court to investigate the ill treatment meted out by Tihar jail to Rajan Pillai. The investigation found evidence that Rajan Pillai was subjected to unfair treatment by the jail authorities. The court settled this case, awarding a token compensation of rupees 10 lakh to Rajan Pillai's widow, Neena Pillai. The findings of the investigation were shocking, some of which found a place in the book On Balance, authored by Leela Seth. Seth Commission also described a crucial lapse on the part of CBI, as it was in a hurry to get hold of Rajan Pillai. While an enthusiastic CBI was in a tearing hurry to arrest Rajan Pillai from the Delhi hotel, it hid critical information instead of submitting them at the court. However, CBI was eager to establish that Rajan Pillai was a chronic alcoholic instead of providing appropriate medical care for him. To prove this point, CBI got hold of the restaurant bill of rupees 17,000 Rajan Pillai paid for buying wine. However, it didn't occur to them that they were also supposed to submit the list of hospitals to the court during a remand hearing. An example was quoted by brother Rajmohan Pillai in his book, A Wasted Death. The municipal clerk in Delhi who filed Rajan Pillai's death certificate wrote his permanent address as Gate Number 4, Tihar Jail, New Delhi. Rajmohan Pillai said he never bothered to correct this in the death certificate of his brother. Rajan Pillai, the astute businessman, was only 47 when these tragic events led to his untimely and disrespectful end. Famed journalist and activist Kuldeep Nayar asks this pertinent question: how does a dead man get justice? How do we ensure justice to a man who is no more?
എങ്ങനെയാണ്?
We will be back with another strange story.